We had planned to interview Khanna. He was apparently on the line. By the way, I'm filling in for Glenn Greenwald, who's away on one of his luxurious holidays, well-deserved. Unfortunately, Khanna seemed to prematurely abort the interview for not fully explained reasons. So hopefully that could be resolved if Congressman Khanna out there is listening, or anybody around him is listening. The invitation stands. I was going to conduct a very respectful interview, actually, and even commend him for being unusually willing among particularly Democratic members of Congress to do ideologically diverse independent media. So the offer stands. I guess now that we have a bit of time, if the staff are willing, I was just going to go through a little bit of what I was asking him and maybe kind of merge it or transition it into a slight editorial on my part. One of the interesting aspects of Kamala Harris being privately coronated at rapid speed, the presumptive Democratic nominee, is that, as Khanna is probably well aware, having been the co-chair of the 2020 Bernie Sanders campaign, Kamala Harris got a grand total of 0 delegates in that race when she ran for the Democratic nomination in 2020. Likewise, she's received 0 delegates in 2024, at least on the basis of delegates that are allocated by popular vote outcome in primary state elections. And so Kamala Harris, really, just objectively speaking, is unprecedentedly being anointed by pure insider machinations with almost no actual voter input. You really have to strain to find even a remotely apt parallel in American history for a major party nominee who receives the nomination without even bothering to attempt to contest the public portion of a nomination contest. People bring up 1968, but for a little bit of a history lesson, Hubert Humphrey, who ended up becoming the Democratic nominee in that year, went on to lose narrowly to Richard Nixon in the general election. He actually did. He was the incumbent vice president at the time under Lyndon Johnson, who withdrew from the race. But even Hubert Humphrey, who was kind of the party establishment favorite, even he had to go around and contest state conventions that were then one of the primary methods used to apportion delegates before the advent of the modern primary system. Kamala Harris has done nothing of the kind. She's been anointed nominee, evidently, over the course of, 24, 36 hours without having to do any public campaigning. It's just been this total Dem insider elevation of her without even thinking that maybe they should pause for a second to consult the electorate. So it's rather remarkable. So that's one of the things I wanted to ask Khanna about. And we have a clip of Khanna in New Hampshire in January of 2020 that I was also planning on asking you about. If we could play that, please. Hopefully that can be retrieved, that clip.
I was asked, and I'll end with this note, I was asked by someone in the press, do people in New Hampshire hold a grudge? Are they upset at the president with the DNC and the first in the primary? I was asked. The press asked that. And I said, you know what? I don't think you understand the voters in New Hampshire. Because the voters of New Hampshire take their responsibility really seriously. And they're not going to make a decision about who should lead the free world, who should lead the United States of America, based on whether they agree or disagree on the primary calendar. It's not that parochial. They're looking at who should lead this nation. Well, we've got wars in Ukraine, wars in the Middle East, an economy that isn't working for people. And they have made the assessment that that person is Joe Biden. And they're putting aside any disagreement to do what is right for the country. That, to me, is the ultimate form of patriotism. And that's what all of you are doing. By working to have Joe Biden written in, I am confident because of your efforts, he's going to have a big win. A win is a win, but a decisive win on Tuesday. And that's going to propel him to have a big win in November, because at the end of the day, I am a believer that Americans love this country and love our democracy and love and want a positive vision of the future, and that's going to work and win over the cynicism and anger that is represented by Donald Trump and the other side.
Okay, so as context, that's Ro Khanna speaking in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in January of this year on behalf of what was then called the Right in Biden campaign. Because what happened was the DNC, which was effectively under the control of Biden and his surrogates, decided that they were going to upend the primary calendar in 2024 to create the most seamless path to victory for Biden. And because in 2020, Biden was boosted by his performance in South Carolina, what the DNC for this cycle wanted to do is displace New Hampshire, which has traditionally, and actually by state statute, by New Hampshire state statute, is required to go first in the primary cycle. They wanted to do away with that, displace New Hampshire, where Biden doesn't perform as well or hadn't in 2020, and put South Carolina first. So what they did was they sent the DNC did, again, under the control effectively of Biden, sent what could only be described as a threat letter, and that this can be pulled up as well, to the state Democratic Party in New Hampshire, where the DNC directed the state party to effectively inform New Hampshire citizens that the election, the New Hampshire primary this year, was to be understood as meaningless. That's the exact quote in the letter that was sent. But nonetheless, this is what I was going to raise with Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna went to New Hampshire and campaigned on behalf of Biden vis-a-vis this Right in Biden campaign. So even though the official Democratic Party apparatus was seeking to negate the Democratic primary in New Hampshire this year, Ro Khanna went to New Hampshire and was encouraging Democrats to write in Joe Biden because he didn't technically appear on the ballot because the DNC wasn't even recognizing the validity of the election. But Ro Khanna was so committed to promoting Joe Biden at that juncture in the name of democracy and the well-being of the nation and all this stuff. He went and was advocating for this Right in Biden initiative, and he was extolling the virtues of New Hampshire voters by saying, look, they take their obligation so seriously, and we ought to rely on their wisdom in choosing how to best express their say in the process for picking the leader of the free world. So what I was simply going to ask him, and I think this is a reasonable question, if anybody disagrees, I'm open to criticism, including from the congressman. But what I was going to ask him is, New Hampshire and every other state now has zero say, at least in terms of the primary electorates, right? I mean, no president has ever withdrawn at so late a point in the election cycle as Biden has voluntarily, on his own accord, we were told, with his mysterious letter that he issued over X, which, by the way, wasn't X supposed to have been subverted by right-wing disinformation or something when Elon Musk took it over? But that's neither here nor there. The point is, Biden had already accumulated about 99% of pledged delegates that are apportioned by primary election outcome in the individual states and territories. So if the rationale for Ro Khanna going around and campaigning for Biden at that point in January, because it was so important for the voters to have their say, how does he react to the voters having their say effectively obviated by this latest Democratic insider push to pressure or coerce Biden to withdrawing under duress? Remember, it was just like 24 hours before that Biden and his operatives were absolutely adamant that he was going to remain in the race. And what does it say that Kamala Harris really stands alone in American history as having been anointed by no voters as a major party nominee? It's staggering, and this is and she's without peer in this regard, at least in the modern primary era, which only really began in the 1970s, but even arguably before that, because even when there was more insider maneuvers that led to how primary elections or contests were resolved and nominees were chosen, there was some semblance of a public process where you had to go around to state parties and jockey with delegates and petition various factions within the party to obtain a majority of delegates. Kamala Harris has barely done any of that, at least not in public. All she apparently did was immediately start getting on the phone, calling up Democratic governors and senators the instant that the Biden letter went out on Sunday afternoon. And, she's now raking in the cash. And everybody thinks that she's such a breath of fresh air, apparently, in the media sectors that were agitating for Biden's ouster, because she can go around screeching about abortion, I guess, more capably than Joe Biden. What is Kamala Harris's foreign policy prescriptions? How do they compare with Biden? Do they differ at all? That's one of the questions I was going to raise with Khanna. Seems pretty reasonable to me, right? I mean, wouldn't you want to know a little bit of information about what a major presidential major party nominee would do in the domain of foreign affairs, right? Shouldn't they be asked a couple of questions, perhaps, about what their plans would be in that regard? We have several hot wars raging that the U.S. is deeply operationally and financially and militarily involved in, and we know next to nothing about what Kamala Harris's individual prescriptions would be for those conflicts. Now, of course, you can relate her to the Biden administration's record, of which she's a member. That's certainly a fair inference to make as to what her future plans would be. But still, I mean, the whole point of a primary process, in theory, would be that she would have to debate and take questions and go around and present herself to different interest groups, to the media, to all other kinds of interested parties, so we can ascertain at least a little bit of what her independent agenda would be, if any. But we have no information in that regard. Nonetheless, the entire punditocracy, the Democratic punditocracy, has gleefully consolidated around her because, again, I guess they love hearing her sermonize about abortion because that's all they care about, as though the president has unilateral authority over, abortion laws in Oklahoma. I don't know. I mean, I guess these Democratic insiders are hoping that Kamala Harris is going to issue an executive fiat, and then Alabama and Mississippi and Oklahoma and South Dakota are all going to have to reinstitute Roe versus Wade era abortion laws or something like that. They don't really work out the precise policy details of what it is that they're so desperate for a President Kamala to do in the realm of abortion. But my point is, the president has awesome unilateral authority over the nuclear codes, for instance. The U.S. military is he or she potentially is the commander-in-chief. Article 2 of the Constitution endows the president with awesome unilateral powers over a specific issue set, which is international relations, foreign policy, military, etc. And we don't know virtually anything about what Kamala Harris would be endeavoring to do on her own individual terms, apart from what she kind of just subordinately would sign on to as a result of her being the vice president in the Biden-Harris administration. That's another thing I was going to ask Khanna. Every single Democrat, including Khanna himself, voted yes on the $61 billion in supplemental appropriations for Ukraine in April, joined by lots of Republicans, and by the way, partially executed by Donald Trump, who also signed off on that massive disbursement of monies for Ukraine. So, is the Kamala Harris agenda or the plan to simply be plowing ahead, full speed on the current status quo with regard to Ukraine? How about Israel? Benjamin Netanyahu is in the United States this week, meeting with whomever, and one of the plans supposedly for the Kamala Harris proponents in the Democratic insider pundit strategist realm was to portray her as perhaps slightly less vociferous in her support for Israel compared to Biden, because it's created consternation within certain elements of the Democratic activist base, right? But we have no real empirical evidence that she diverges virtually at all from Biden. So that's another, potentially pertinent question to raise with, the nominee who's just been anointed out of thin air, more or less. So that's something that potentially, Khanna could have addressed as somebody who is a Democratic member of Congress and is in the mix and all this kind of stuff. Now, those seem like reasonable questions to me. I don't know precisely on what basis he exited the interview. I saw him on the screen over here, so he was definitely here and waiting to be to be interviewed, but he left. So, unfortunate, but what are you going to do? Those are the... Sometimes you have to let the chips fall where they may in this industry, to use a bizarre cliche that I just invented on the fly. I guess for now, I will just note that I'm going to be guest hosting for Glenn Greenwald for about another week or so while he's, again, on his much-deserved vacation and probably snickering from a distance at my foibles. So I'm sure he's enjoying that. So tune in tomorrow, and you'll get lots of great content from me, Michael Tracey, who is once again guest hosting for Glenn Greenwald here on System Update on Rumble. So we'll see you soon.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.